Well, my name is Hugh Whitemore, and I'm the writer of the film you're about to see, Into the Storm.
Then out spake brave Horatius, captain of the gate.
This is Frank Dolger. I produced this film and also produced The Gathering Storm, the first film Hugh and I did about the life of Winston Churchill.
Then facing fearful.
When we came to try to create this new film, there was a huge problem lying in wait for us, and that problem was World War II. How could you possibly deal with something as enormous and so complicated in the 2 hours of a television movie? It was important, we thought, to have a structure that was flexible and yet focused. And we thought it was important that we could present a picture of Churchill which was fresh, introduce the audience to different sides of his character. And so the question initially was where and how to start this epic story.
We also face a great problem in that there have literally been dozens of dramatic films and documentaries about Winston Churchill and the Second World War, and how to signal to the viewers right from the first frame that they were in for something different, and as you say, to make sure it was focused very much on the man. So the idea of starting in France in this very brief period when Churchill took his first vacation during the war, as he waited for the votes to be counted to determine his fate if he'd be re-elected as Prime Minister, gave us the kicking off point that we thought was a very fresh approach and led very gracefully into the flashback, starting with the scene here in which Churchill actually does become Prime Minister, primarily because he decided not to say anything at a key meeting.
And the front runner, as it were, was Lord Halifax, who was much admired by the King of the King George VI.
One of the many things that surprised me when Hugh and I first started working on the project was to learn how much George VI disliked Winston Churchill, how greatly distrusted he was.
Well, not just King George VI, but the whole of the British ruling class. And in those days, 50, 60, 70 years ago, the class system in England and Britain was very powerful and really dominated the whole of the government of the country. And people regarded, upper-class people regarded Churchill as an unreliable man, a man of sudden whim, sudden unconsidered actions, and also something of a traitor insofar as he had left the Tory party to become a Liberal, and then left the Liberal Party to become a Tory again, so people didn't know where they were with him. Didn't trust him.
It's also quite extraordinary that Churchill was very sure that he was born for this moment when he refers to the fact that this was his destiny, which I think did not sit well with a lot of the politicians and certainly with the ruling class either.
No, not at all. He was an extraordinary man for many reasons, and that's certainly one of them. He had this overwhelming belief in his destiny, in his power, and his ability to lead the country into war.
One of the things we grappled with in the portrayal of George VI was how to treat his stutter. His stutter was quite crippling at times, and we wanted to capture that sense. But at the same time, we didn't want it to be comic, and we also didn't want it to be distracting. And we think IAIN GLEN did a fantastic job striking the balance of definitely letting the audience know that it was a problem, but not getting in the way of the performance at all.
And also, he had that extraordinary ability to make you believe he was king. He had authority, he had grace, he had a marvelous delivery of the lines.
He also had a great tailor. Anybody would look like a king, I think, in some of those uniforms and suits, Hugh.
Yeah, this is an interesting section here because this is when they tried to dissuade him from going to France. And I got this story from a marvellous old man called Edward Ford, Sir Edward Ford, who had been private secretary to the king. And when I met him, was an old, rather sick man, now alas dead. But he told me that the scene that follows with the king, Edward Ford told me he was there also present. And so I feel rather pleased that this is my one scoop for the whole film.
This is the one story that appears in no other source.
Yes.
That's quite an accomplishment, actually, to have a story about Churchill that hasn't been in somehow reported.
What can I do? I think it's only one.
We did several takes of the scene because, again, there were quite a few words here that Ian was tripping over because apparently you put in a lot of the words that the king had the most trouble with pronouncing. And the first take, it was completely incomprehensible. So I think by about take 10, we actually had something that people could understand.
Would almost certainly be killed.
And I have a replacement.
Yes, I think replacement in particular gave him great trouble.
He's so good, Ian Glenn.
Yes.
Great quality.
And completely transformed into this part.
3 cheers to the casting director, say I.
Very good. And this was an enormous challenge, creating the incredibly famous moment when Churchill steps out on the balcony. I think he was the only prime minister who was actually...
Chamberlain did.
Chamberlain as well.
Yeah.
But no one remembers that.
No.
And of course, what's extraordinary about having seen so many photographs and footage of this, and you think it's such a great triumph, at the same time you realize, having watched the film, what a difficult place Churchill was in at this point and what his thoughts were and how dark they were. And it wasn't just a moment of great triumph. I was fascinated to find out that all the windows at Buckingham Palace had been boarded up, obviously, to prevent against bomb damage.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we went to recreate this. We had to cover all those fantastic windows with that rather nasty wood. I love this shot because the way Thaddeus framed it, again, it looks like a stage. And it really is, this time he really is leaving the stage for the first time. And again, I think one of the things you accomplished enormously in the script and also the actors portrayed was George VI, who did not want Churchill as prime minister, thought it was a huge mistake, disliked him, actually became incredibly close to him.
Yes, I'm very fond of him too, I think.
Did they see each other after Churchill
I
left
think so,
office?
Yes.
I would like you to accept the Order of the Garter.
But he died, of course, young, the king.
Yes. And I think Churchill was a great fan and great friend of the current queens.
Yes, and when Churchill finally resigned and retired from politics, he gave a special dinner party at Downing Street for the Queen and Prince Philip, which is, I think, one of the rare occasions when she's been to a private dinner party like that.
How can I accept the most noble Order of the Garter when the British people have given me the Order of the Boot?
No, I shouldn't.
So Churchill never actually accepted any titles, did he?
He did. He had the Order of the Garter when the king died.
Oh, he did afterwards.
Yes.
I feel we've become friends.
Thank you, sir. I feel that too.
It was extraordinary how close they became after all those years.